My parents sold my apartment to pay for my sister's dream wedding, then called to thank me for the gift. They thought they'd gotten away with everything. I told them to check their mailbox. Their smiles vanished the moment they opened the envelope. Hello, folks. My name is Megan Foster. I'm 34 years old, and according to my parents, I should have been honored that they sold my apartment. Not angry, not devastated, honored, because apparently losing my home was a beautiful gift to my sister. At least that's how they explained it when they called to thank me. The truly incredible part, they genuinely believed I'd be happy about it. My younger sister, Chloe, had always lived like consequences were optional. Expensive tastes, cheap decisions, designer handbags she couldn't afford, vacations she couldn't pay for, luxury lifestyles funded by other people. Usually my parents, especially my mother. Mom spent most of her life treating Chloe like a princess, trapped in a temporary financial inconvenience. Every problem required rescuing. Every mistake required fixing. Every disaster required funding. And somehow there was always money, at least until there wasn't. Growing up, I learned something early. If Chloe wanted something, she received it. If I wanted something, I got a lecture about responsibility. The rules were remarkably consistent. When Chloe totaled her second car, my parents bought another one. When I needed help with college expenses, I was told to work harder. When Chloe maxed out multiple credit cards, my parents paid them off. When I saved for years to buy property, nobody congratulated me. Different children, different standards, the family tradition. Eventually, I stopped expecting fairness. Life became easier after that. At 26, I bought a small apartment. Nothing extravagant. One bedroom, nice neighborhood, close to work. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Every payment came from me. Every bill came from me. Every repair came from me. The apartment represented something important. Freedom, proof that I could build a life without depending on anyone, especially my family. Several years later, my career took off. A promotion became another promotion, then another. Eventually, I accepted a position in another city. A fantastic opportunity, the kind people wait years to receive. I decided to keep the apartment as an investment property. The rental income was steady. The location was excellent. The value continued increasing. Financially, it made perfect sense. Unfortunately, it also attracted my mother's attention, especially after Chloe got engaged. The engagement itself wasn't surprising. The wedding plans were. Apparently, Chloe didn't want a normal wedding. She wanted a magazine wedding, the kind with imported flowers, luxury venues, custom everything, a wedding budget larger than most people's annual salaries. My parents immediately supported the idea, because of course they did. The problem? They couldn't afford it. Not remotely. I learned this months later. At the time, all I noticed were strange phone calls. Questions about my apartment. Questions about ownership paperwork. Questions about rental agreements. Nothing overt, nothing alarming, just enough to feel odd. When I asked why, Mom always had an explanation. She was curious, interested, making conversation. The usual nonsense. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from my tenant. A very strange call. According to him, several people had shown up claiming ownership of the property. Ownership. Interesting word. The moment he said it, every alarm bell in my head started ringing. I immediately contacted the property management company, then the county records office, then my attorney, and over the next 48 hours, a truly unbelievable story emerged. Somehow documents had been filed, ownership records had changed, signatures existed, paperwork I had never signed. At first, I thought there must be some mistake. Then my mother called and immediately destroyed that theory. She sounded excited, proud even, like she'd just completed a successful surprise party. "Megan," she said, "we wanted to thank you." Thank me, never a good sign. I asked for what? Then she delivered the sentence I'll never forget. For the wedding gift. My stomach dropped. What wedding gift? Silence, then laughter. Actual laughter. As though I was being modest. As though we both understood something I somehow forgot. The apartment, everything went quiet. The room, the city outside my office window. My thoughts, everything, because suddenly I understood. They believed they'd gotten away with it. They genuinely thought the matter was settled. That ownership had transferred. That the money was gone. That Chloe would get her dream wedding. And that I'd simply accept it. The confidence was remarkable, almost impressive. Unfortunately for them, they'd overlooked something important. A very important detail. One that turned their celebration into a disaster. I listened to my mother talk for nearly 10 more minutes. Flowers, venues, deposits, wedding plans. Then I smiled. A real smile. Because by then, I'd already spoken to my attorney, already spoken to investigators, already gathered every document I needed. And most importantly, I'd already mailed something. An envelope, one that would arrive the next morning, just before breakfast, just before reality. When Mom finally finished talking, I calmly said, "You should check your mailbox tomorrow." Silence. What? I smiled again. "Trust me." Then I hung up. The next morning, my parents opened that envelope. And judging by the voicemail waiting on my phone 30 minutes later, their smiles vanished the moment they saw what was inside. Because sometimes, the people celebrating your loss don't realize the investigation started before the party did. The voicemail waiting on my phone the next morning was 37 seconds long. And for the first 20 seconds, my mother couldn't form a complete sentence. She was too busy panicking, which immediately told me the envelope had arrived. Good, because I'd spent the previous week making sure it contained everything necessary. Every document, every report, every signature comparison, every legal notice. The truth had apparently ruined breakfast. I listened to the voicemail twice, then a third time, not because I enjoyed it, because I was trying to understand how quickly confidence could collapse. The answer, apparently, was overnight. The same woman who'd been thanking me for my gift was now practically hyperventilating. "Megan, call us immediately." A pause. "There has to be some mistake." Another pause. "Please call us." Interesting, because 24 hours earlier, they were celebrating. Now they were begging. I didn't return the call. Instead, I went to work. 3 hours later, Dad called, then Chloe, then Mom again. By lunchtime, I'd received 42 missed calls. The family group chat was even worse. Questions, accusations, panic. Nobody seemed to be having a good day, which made sense, because inside, the envelope was a copy of a formal fraud complaint, a copy of the title dispute, a notice from my attorney, and most importantly, a forensic handwriting report. The report proving my signature had been forged, repeatedly, very badly I might add. Whoever attempted the forgery clearly believed cursive was a decorative suggestion. The truth, by mid-afternoon, the entire story finally emerged, and somehow it was even dumber than I'd imagined. My parents hadn't sold my apartment legally, because they couldn't. They weren't on the deed. They weren't on the mortgage. They weren't on anything. Instead, they'd worked through a friend of a friend who claimed he could handle the paperwork. Whenever someone says they can handle paperwork, run. Run fast, because legitimate professionals don't describe legal transactions like secret missions. Apparently, this genius convinced my parents that ownership could be transferred using forged authorization forms. Then he found a buyer, collected a large commission, disappeared, leaving everyone else holding the disaster. The buyer was furious. The county records office was furious. My attorney was furious. And the investigator assigned to the case sounded almost excited. Apparently, fraudsters make paperwork mistakes. A lot of them, and these mistakes were spectacular. The wedding collapse. The timing couldn't have been worse, or better, depending on your perspective. The wedding was scheduled for the following weekend. Deposits had already been spent. Contracts had already been signed. Vendors expected payment. Lots of payment. Unfortunately, the money funding those payments had suddenly become evidence. Very expensive evidence. The accounts were frozen pending investigation. The property transfer was voided. The sale proceeds disappeared into legal proceedings. And suddenly, Chloe's dream wedding became a nightmare. The luxury venue canceled. Several vendors walked away. Guests started hearing rumors. Then more rumors. Then the truth. The wedding still happened. Technically, just not the version Chloe imagined. The imported flowers became grocery store flowers. The ballroom became a community venue. The string quartet became a Bluetooth speaker. Life is funny sometimes. The confrontation. A week later, my parents showed up at my office. Both looked exhausted, older, smaller. Reality had not been kind. Mom cried immediately. Dad looked embarrassed. For the first time in my life, neither of them seemed interested in defending Chloe. They were too busy trying to explain themselves. Eventually, my father admitted the truth. They never thought I'd fight back. The sentence hung in the air, because it explained everything. Not just the apartment. Years of favoritism. Years of expectations. Years of sacrifice. They genuinely believed I would absorb the damage, the way I always had. I stared at them, then asked one question. Would you have done this to Chloe? Silence. Immediate silence, because everyone knew the answer. Of course not. Epilogue, 4 years later. 4 years later, my apartment is still mine. The tenants stayed. The property value increased. The investment remains one of the best decisions I've ever made. The fraud case eventually concluded. Several people faced criminal charges, including the man who arranged the fake transfer. My parents weren't charged, mostly because investigators determined they were unbelievably reckless rather than criminal masterminds. A distinction my attorney found hilarious. Chloe eventually paid for her own lifestyle. Not happily, but successfully. Amazing what happens when rescue stops arriving. As for my relationship with my parents, it survived, barely, because trust returns slowly, especially after someone tries to sell your home. One afternoon, nearly 2 years later, my mother admitted something I'd suspected all along. We were so focused on making Chloe happy that we stopped caring what it cost you. Simple, painful, true. Looking back, the strangest part isn't that my parents sold my apartment to fund my sister's dream wedding. It's that they called to thank me for the gift. As though theft becomes generosity if you smile while doing it. They thought they'd gotten away with everything. Thought the money was secured. Thought the celebration could begin. Then an envelope arrived. A very ordinary envelope, filled with very extraordinary consequences. And in a single morning, their dream wedding budget transformed into evidence. Which is why I've learned something important about people who build happiness on someone else's loss. They usually celebrate too early.